I really changed my focus because my wife has been a big inspiration for me. So my wife used to teach an ESL class. So she got to help a lot of people that were undocumented citizens here in the US they trusted her. And just the way she impacted and helped those people's lives, I thought, if I look at my legacy right now, I've got my daughter I'm very proud of, my family, my career, my certifications, but who's going to remember me when I'm gone? That's not enough to be remembered over. So I took a page from her book, got inspired, and started teaching at the college. And that's when I really turned my focus towards mentoring and helping others. I've always been a competitive person, always goal-oriented. And one of the things I'll say about pen testing, I'll never claim I was ever the best pen tester or close to it. I did a good job, but I always put so much focus into my career in this. And so then I just kind of decided I wanted to help others. Was just pondering this idea that, the world needs more coaches and mentors and teachers.
This is Hackers to Founders, a podcast about cybersecurity professionals who have reached the pinnacle of their cybersecurity expertise and have ventured into new frontiers. Whether it's launching innovative startups or making impactful investments in our industry. My name is Chris Magistrato, and I'm a vulnerability researcher best known for traveling and meeting hackers from all around the world. And I'm using what little extrovert skills I have to introduce to you hackers that are changing the world. And welcome to the Hackers to Founder podcast. My name is Chris Magistrato, and today we're here with Phillip, Wylie, a veteran cybersecurity professional with over 27 years of experience, known for his work as a pen tester, educator, and podcast host. Phillip has influenced the industry not only through his technical acumen, but also through his dedication of mentoring and community building. He is the co-author of the widely celebrated The Pen Tester Blueprint, starting a career as an ethical hacker, and the founder of the Pwn School Project, and a frequent keynote speaker at major cybersecurity events. With a career spanning technical roles, teaching, and content creation, Phillip exemplifies the evolution from a hacker into a leader. Join us as we dive deep into his inspiring story. Welcome to the podcast, Phillip.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be joining your show. And one of the things, my favorite things is meeting people. And nowadays it's kind of even more cool when I get to meet fellow content creators and podcasters. So it's always fun because I can talk about cybersecurity stuff and hacking all day long, but to get to talk about some other topics too, it can be fun. So it's great to have add another podcaster to my friends list.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's exactly that. I've been in the industry, at least on the technical side of cybersecurity, for the past decade or so. But now that I've started doing podcasts and doing this more and more, I'm realizing there's a lot here, and it's really fun to start meeting people. Because during COVID, I was recruiting. I was doing cybersecurity recruiting, and I had to call people. I had to interview them, speak with them and stuff. And now that I can take those skills and just message people hey, do you want to talk about your stuff? I'd love to hear your story, everything else. It's a great way to network and meet more people. And listening to your content and hearing the way that you interview people is very unique. And listening to other podcasters and how they interview, I know in my first few episodes, I was kind of am I doing this right? Do I talk too much about me? And I think it's just, there's different styles and stuff like that. Have you also noticed that as you've been podcasting, finding your groove?
Yeah, you do. And some of the best advice I got while podcasting, actually, when I started podcasting, it kind of started from doing some webinars for BugCrowd. I used to be a BugCrowd ambassador. And so I really got lucky because BugCrowd was one of the most pivotal opportunities I had. It wasn't a paid opportunity. It was free. But the good thing about it was a lot of things I'm doing today, I started doing because of that role as an ambassador. Because one of the first times I got to meet with some of the people from BugCrowd was at RSA and B-Sides San Francisco back in 2019. And so I was talking to the VP over marketing and the CEO of the company, and they said, "Hey, would you do a podcast series on pen testing called A Day in Life of a Pen Tester?" So that's kind of where I started. I did a 5-part series, and then a year later, I did another 2-part series. And one of the guests I had was a SANS instructor and an ICS OT security professional, Don Weber. And we were going through prepping for the webinar. And I would say, "Yeah, I've got a question." He said, "Yeah, don't phrase it like a question. Just ask it or make it more discussion oriented. And so I did that, and that was a big game changer in the way I podcast. Because one of the things I noticed too was I used to podcast with two other folks on the Uncommon Journey, which was my first podcast that started back in 2020 with Alyssa Miller and Chloe Miss Doggy. And we'd have like a list of questions, and we'd be like, I have a question for you. And it just wasn't as smooth, but just kind of getting the experience, learning from others, and just kind of trial and error as you do it. Because I used to always come up with a list of questions, kind of focused on that. And then now it's just kind of like, I have people share their hacker origin story. So they kind of share how they got started, where they are today. And then from there, the conversation flows. And so that's kind of the way I've kind of done it. And it's just something that evolves over your time as a podcaster. You'll kind of get questions in mind that you'll think of, that you just have a conversation. So that's kind of how it's went for me. And I feel like it's been successful.
How was it having multiple hosts on your podcast? Because I think about that, and I just wonder if it's something that will be helpful or hurtful for the podcast. I have no idea.
I think it's something you have to experiment with, and I think it depends on the number of hosts that you have. Because for me, I'm one of these kind of people that if I'm in a situation, I've been a guest on podcasts before where on the podcast, there was like two other guests, and some people are more dominant when they're speaking. I mean, they'll just...
Yeah.
You just can't get a word in edgewise. And that's kind of, as a podcast host, that's something you can control. And that's something I do. If I ever have more than one guest, I make sure that I get everyone's opinion, because if you don't govern that, not to say anyone's bad, that they're a dominant speaker like that, but for you to have the best effect and the best outcome, you really need to be able to control that a little bit. And so I've understood that challenge myself, but I think the more hosts you have, it could be more difficult. But if it's like friends of yours that you used to working with, a good example is look at the Paul Security Weekly guys. They've got like 3 or 4 hosts on there with a guest, and they manage that well. So I think it's once you get used to the others working with them, it can become more easy, because it's kind of like the Cyber Circus Network, a collaboration I do with the Barcode podcast and Cyber Distortion podcast. We get together and there's 4 of us. Cyber Distortion has 2 guests. Barcode has 1 guest. So there's 4 of us get together and we're interviewing. So there's a little more planning in that. And I think when you first start out, you have to plan a little bit more on who's going to ask what question and so forth. Like, I think it's a little more planning, but as you work more and more together, it gets easy, and you're easy to work around that without as much planning.
That's very interesting, especially the planning part. Additionally, the part where you're mentioning that people can like take over the podcast or the thing. Like, I've seen, I try to watch a good amount of podcasts now and like host and like see how they do things. And like one of the ones like I was watching was like is more like a political based one where like they're purposely trying to make conflicting like a controversy type conversation so that they get more like views and clicks and things like this, right? And this is like a podcast host, and then I saw him on another podcast where there was like, I think there was like 7 people on it, and the way that he spoke, it would be like something like, I believe this, and then throw out this like really obscure thing where it's like, it's so outlandish that you have to ask, like you want to ask him more, so he takes up more like screen time and stuff. And I was like, this is a really unique strategy. I don't like it, but it's very interesting nonetheless.
You have to find what works for you. I mean, it's just like, take for instance, one of the best podcasters in our niche, Jack Reciter. He's a storyteller, and just the quality and video production, all that goes into what he does. We all have got our own way. I mean, I think storytelling is important, but it's just kind of part of my podcast, not the whole thing. And not to say, but that's why he's like the number 1 cybersecurity podcast. But we just have to find out what works for us best. Because if you're trying to be a Jack Reciter and you just don't fit that mold, you're going to fail. But you have to find who you are as a podcaster and get that figured out, and you'll be successful.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I think for our content, we're doing more interviews and stuff like that. And I think he does do the interviews, but you're 100% right. He focuses on like almost like a true crime type of documentary style, which I'm like exactly like, I don't know if it's an exact quote, but a very close quote to the interview that I saw with him and another podcaster that I work with. I think it's with the Shell. And it was very eye opening. He's like, I didn't see this in the market, and there was enough people reporting the news in cybersecurity, but I wanted to actually interview and like have a whole storytelling aspect of it. And and he's been doing it for like a great amount of time. So he's been flowing and getting it through, which is beautiful. All right. So, I would like to ask you and learn a little bit more. So when I was doing research on you, I was almost like ecstatic to find that like I didn't, maybe it exists, but I didn't see it. I didn't see any episodes of you speaking about like how you grew, at least in the details that I was interested in. So I'm like, great, that means I can ask these questions and I can dig deep. So let's start with some of these questions let's start with your upbringing, just as your childhood. So I know that you're currently, or at least sometime in your life, you were in Texas. Did you always start in Texas, or did you end up there later in life?
No, I was born and raised here. I only spent 9 months outside of Texas because my ex-wife's mom and stepdad and sister and brother lived in the Fort Walton Beach area. So we lived there for about 9 months, but ended up coming back. But been in Texas most of my life. I like it pretty well here. And so kind of some of the things were in my childhood that kind of led me to wanting to be a hacker, really kind of gave me kind of an inkling that I would make a good hacker if I would have known back then. But back then, I was born in 65. So there probably hasn't been any kind of hacking. There's been, other types of, maybe social engineering used, conning or whatever. But my dad used to take apart some of my mechanical toys because back when I was a kid in the, late 60s, early 70s, the toys weren't a lot. They weren't computerized. They were mechanical. They may have had like some electronic components like LEDs or something, lights on it, mechanical parts, little cars and robots. And my dad used to take them apart to see how they worked because he was a welder. So welder by trade, a fitter welder. And he was kind of wanting to find a better career for himself, to have a better quality of life for his family. And he was they used to be some of these correspondence courses, what they called them back in the day. You'd see in these newspapers or TV guide, there'd be these different trade schools that offered correspondence training, where for electronics, they would send you out all the pieces. You would follow the instructions. I mean, back then there really wasn't videos. You had books. So you had these manuals. They would just send you these PCB boards and you like solder stuff on there and all this. So he was going through that to do, to be like electronics maintenance person or repair person. And he never did finish that, but I think that was kind of why he was interested in how things worked. And I got interested too, because my dad would take apart my toys and I would take them apart. And then I'd end up getting in trouble from my mom later on. It's like, we bought these toys for you. They're not cheap, but I figured out how to take them apart. And one time we went fishing with my mom, my aunt. At the time, my brother was just a baby, but we were at the lake and my brother and I were just up in the car. And I got bored and I started unplugging wires from underneath the dash. And the car wouldn't start or whatever. And so they asked me, can you put it back? I was able to figure out how to put it back together. So there was kind of some idea that maybe there was a future for me in tech. But when I was in high school, I really didn't take it that seriously. So in high school, I graduated with like a C grade point average, a C average, took my college entrance exams, and the college entrance exams were too low. So for my grade point average. So if I'd done better in school, it wouldn't have been a big deal. So they said, if you get like 6 letters of recommendation from your teachers from the high school, you can still get into college. I could do that, take the entrance exam. And so I'm not really a patient kind of person. I'm kind of instant gratification. So that sounded like a lot of work to me. And college really didn't, 4 more years of school didn't really sound like something I wanted to do. So I ended up going to wrestling school because I was a power lifter. And my friend said, hey, you're a big muscular guy. You should go into pro wrestling. So I went to wrestling school and I did that for a couple years. It was an interesting experience.
What do they teach you in wrestling school?
They teach you how to fall properly and how to fake punches, fake kicks, pull punches, because you really don't want to hit someone full force. And the big thing is falling, because I remember at the beginning of wrestling practice, we would just practice jumping up and landing on our back. We'd go through these drills constantly over and over to get used to landing right, because, you'd want to land more on your upper back, kind of raise your hips up with your legs so you're not really going to injure your lower back. And then you do that because that fall is pretty similar. If they do a hip toss where the person you're running at them, they'll like grab you from behind the back and kind of flip you over their hip, is a hip toss. So you're just kind of turning a flip and landing. And that's one of the drills we'd also do in practice. We'd like run across the ring, turn a flip and land, practice landing. And so that particular fall worked on a body slam or whatever move. If they went to throw you, you would land that way. So you had to make sure that you're tucking your neck, that you're not getting injured. If you're getting body slammed, the person you're body slamming, you're kind of holding their head up when you body slam them. So that way they don't injure their neck. It's really easy to injure your neck or hit your head when you're falling. So we just kind of went through that, learned how to fake punches and kicks and that sort of thing. And you just kind of, it's interesting because people think that you have to be in really good cardio shape, and while you may have to have some cardio conditioning, the interesting thing is the veterans, which some of those guys could be kind of out of shape and probably couldn't run very far or be on an exercise bike very long, but they learned to pace themselves. And used to, when you would see the wrestlers go outside of the ring and walk around, or they just lay there on the mat for a while, that was kind of to catch their wind, to get their breath and rest up. Yeah. And so you kind of learn to pace yourself. So those are some of the things that you learn to do. And people really think that it's scripted because the wrestling matches, wrestlers are typically traveling, so they don't have the opportunity to be training together. And so really the only thing you know is who's going to win, share how the match is going to be ended, how the person's going to win, and then some special moves along the way. So it's really not scripted. They know the outcome, but it's kind of ad hoc as it goes, improv, the way the match goes.
Have you ever experienced or like maybe know something from wrestling lore where something was supposed to be like, it was created like on the moment or whatever, and it just didn't go too well, or like there's some other complications?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know really what comes to mind. And another thing I was always kind of wondered about, and I'm not sure, I can't really share any cases that I know of, but a case that you're wrestling someone and they get mad, or you don't pull a punch, and then someone just gets mad and just really beats the heck out of someone. Yeah. I've had some cases where I wrestled some guys. There were some guys here in Dallas that Brickhouse Brown and Iceman King Parsons, they kind of haze the new guys. And so when you're starting out, you have to lose all the time. And they would kind of mess with us. I mean, I remember I was in a match with those guys and I got so mad at them because they would come up and they were actually slapping me. And for me, I'd rather be punched or kicked as hard as you can kick me, because slapping just really makes me angry. Yeah. And so they were like slapping me, and boy, I was just, you had to keep your composure, because if you messed up, if you hit them back, then you're probably done wrestling. And on top of that, it's a tag team match. Even though it's a tag team match, there's two of us. Your partner wants to get in wrestling. They're not going to come up and come to your defense. And if something happened that you were beating the other guy, who knows if they're not going to send people in from the back. So there's a lot of ifs. So you just have to kind of keep your composure, and then just kind of getting slapped. That was really, really aggravating moment. And then there's been cases where I wrestled some guys. I wrestled the Samoan SWAT team. They went on to be pretty famous in WWF and WWE. WWF became the WWE. And I was in a match with them, and Samoan people are just naturally huge. I mean, you think of Dwayne Johnson's mom's side of the family is Samoan. And so if you see a lot of the people on his mom's side, Samoans are just naturally huge people. I mean, the women are like 6 foot tall and 200 something pounds, and the guys are 300, 350, and just huge, really big bone guys. Tall, but not your 6'6", 6'8", 7 foot type guys, but someone is like 6'2", 6'3", really big bone and just gigantic. And I was tag team wrestling those guys one time, and I got lucky because most people either got whiplash or concussions, end up going to the hospital. But I was in there wrestling with them, and I got tagged in. They threw me in the corner and they hit me in the jaw. And they were pulling a punch, but it was like a 220-pound man hitting me full force. I thought, what did my tag team partner do to upset them? Because, they smacked the heck out of me and it hurt. And then they threw me off. I got suplexed off the top ropes. And so if you know what suplex is, it's kind of like where they flip you backwards, but they set me on the top ropes, suplexed me. And when I landed, they went back up on the top ropes and jumped off on me. There's two ways of jumping off the top ropes. One way is where they break their own fall. They just purposely don't land on you full force, like you would pull a punch. But the other way is you start raising up. So when they land on you, you're not on the floor flat. It kind of breaks the fall. I did not know the way they did it. So I was laying flat, and this 350-pound guy jumped off full force, landing on me, knocking the wind out of me. I couldn't get up for a minute. They tagged me out because they'd won. The referee did, and the referee come over and said, "Okay, get up. You need to go back. Get off the mat. Time to go back to the locker room." And I couldn't breathe. I lost my wind. I lost my breath. And I sat there for a while. I finally got my breath back. So when I was walking back to the locker room, I was spitting up blood. So I'm not really sure if I bit my jaw or what happened, where the blood was coming from. But it was a scary experience because, man, for a while I wasn't sure whether these guys were playing or not. I thought maybe they were serious, maybe they're mad, but they just so strong, such big individuals. It's really hard for them to pull punches and kicks. And the other wrestlers always joked about them too. I remember one wrestler said something about they had a nightmare that the Samoan SWAT team scared Freddy Krueger.
That's really good.
Because what they refer to as being stiff, someone that don't really pull punches very well, so they referred to them being stiff. So they said really stiff, so stiff that in the nightmare it scared Freddy Krueger.
That's terrific. Yeah, that's you actually bring up a point. Like I was always terrified to wrestle or like even like play fight with people when I was younger, because I was like, if I hit them or whatever, they get mad, then we're actually fighting. And it's like, how do I know or trust an individual if it's going to be like relaxed or whatever? I think you have to know the person and stuff like that. But that's interesting.
And that's the scary thing about when you go to wrestling school, because back when I went to wrestling school, I guess I started, it was about 1987 or so, I believe. Yeah. And so I was going to wrestling school back then.
Was it the Hulk Hogan days, or who was dominating?
Yeah, Hulk Hogan was like the top guy in WWF then. I'd wrestled in WCW, which is Ric Flair and all those guys. They had just acquired the UWF, and that's where like Sting came over from. But one of the things that really worried me back then, they hadn't shared that wrestling was fake, so they were still trying to go on saying that is real. And so going to wrestling school, I was really worried about what would happen. Is it real until, you pay your dues? But it was really odd that you went to wrestling school right away. You knew that it wasn't real. And it really kind of surprised me, because there was that one reporter that got slapped back in the 80s where he was asking them if wrestling was real or not. He's late 80s or early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember. I've seen a clip. I think I remember.
John Stossel, I think, was the guy interviewing him, the journalist, and they slapped him. The guy, I think, ended up getting some hearing loss from it. So going into wrestling,
he sued, right? Too, wasn't?
Yeah, he sued.
Yeah, and he won, I think.
But yeah, they were just trying to protect the business. So I really didn't know going in what it would be like, because I thought at first maybe they go in there, you wrestle for real, and then once you find out, once they realize you're okay, they let you in, but because that would have been really easy for someone to send someone in undercover to investigate whether it's real or not.
Yeah, that's true. I think circling back to like what was like allowed, not allowed, and stuff like that. I want to know. I don't know if you can talk about this or not, but was people also like using like steroids or any type of juicing stuff or gear? Because like I feel like nowadays, like, at least like in like if you're talking about bodybuilding and like even the competitions, it's pretty much assumed like, yeah, that's what's done and stuff like that. And even on social media now, it's talked a lot more so for the safety of the individuals that are taking them and like that want to get into it, because you have people that it's like they don't know, and then they're just like, let me try let me get on as much stuff as possible.
Yeah.
All at the same time, and like not knowing how to cycle correctly, not knowing how to take blood work and stuff like that. So there's a lot of people that do come out and speak about it. So I don't know if the community that you're speaking of, if they've started to get more into speaking about it, or if it's kind of still like a hush hush thing.
I'm not really sure if they're keeping it hush hush. I would think it would probably be a little more accepted, because a lot of people have been doing it. Because it was interesting back in those days, people could just go to doctors and get a prescription for steroids. Yeah. And then they classify it as a controlled substance, I think sometime late 80s or early 90s. So then that's where you saw a lot of the blowback in the WWF, because they had this thing where there was a scandal about steroid use. And then Vince McMahon decided he was going to have everyone tested, and they couldn't be using steroids and all this. And so it kind of was kind of hush hush then, but I think it's a little more accepted, because people can go to, I know people in the cybersecurity community that are using hormone replacement therapy because they can't, they're really not producing enough testosterone. And I think that's kind of a loophole for people that want to get on steroids, because I competed in powerlifting for a long time. I was a drug-free powerlifter, and I knew of people that would get steroids legally, but they would go to these certain doctors and they would take blood tests or tell them certain things to do to get their testosterone levels low enough where they could get testosterone stuff. But that was like back in the early 2000s. I think it's gotten a little easier for people, and because, you see all this hormone replacement therapy clinics and all this stuff out there now, it's a little more widely accepted. But I think the use of it is probably even more nowadays than when I was in wrestling. I think it's even more so because you see these people are so lean and ripped. It's really hard for people to be that lean and do it drug free, because you look at a lot of it. One of the good ways to compare, was you look at drug free powerlifters compared to powerlifters that aren't drug free. They're the big guys were usually leaner than what you would see in drug free powerlifting. And there's some exception to the rules, and whether people really want to put in that hard effort of diet and cardio to get lean like that. But yeah, I think it's probably still kind of common. I think I don't know what about all sports, but I think, a lot of people are using it. Some of the things too was, even like, some Olympic sports, there's some, people, because just kind of gauging for what I've seen in powerlifting. At one time, one of the federations, the U.S. Federation that went to the IPF World Championships, there were guys that competed there that were taking steroids, but they would clean up or take things that were undetected or stop taking so many days out or weeks out before competition, so it wasn't detected. So it was a matter of, it really wasn't a drug-free sport. It was a drug-tested sport, meaning that people just had to pass a drug test if they were picked to take a drug test.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. There was, what was that? There was a recent show on Netflix that talked about some drug use for steroid use with the American Gladiators, I think it was. That was like a bit where they talked about like how they would use, and they'd also be on tour, and then like they just never had time to recover. So it was just really difficult for them. And it actually goes into the whole story of like the company and like how they were working with them and the pay. And it's a very, very just interesting story from like a business perspective, as well as like hearing their voice around it and stuff. But
interesting that you bring up American Gladiators, because probably something I never shared on any other podcast before that people can hear her first. Was back in the day, I got married, I got out of pro wrestling, and I was working for this guy delivering produce, and American Gladiators were coming to town, and I tried out to be a contestant because I wanted to go up against the Gladiators. I was a young, kind of cocky, ambitious, whatever you want to call it, that wanted to go up against the Gladiators. That was the whole thing. I didn't care about winning the show. I just wanted to go one-on-one with Gladiators, and I went and tried out for it. They were in Fort Worth, and at the time I wasn't in good shape. I didn't make the cut because you had to do how many push-ups, setups you can do in a certain time, all these different athletic skills tests. It's probably something like you would do for football or something. And at the time I really wasn't doing cardio or, much things to be in shape. So I didn't make the cut, but it was something I tried out. And to be a contestant, not an actual gladiator.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, they had to when the Gladiators were coming, like they had to beat every single person, right? Like that was like kind of the thing, like they tried to beat everybody. Yeah. Yeah, very cool. So did you also see them like live when they came out and it's like performing as well?
No, I never did see any of those events.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, very interesting. So like among, I think I watched one of the podcasts or the things that you were speaking about. You said that you were all at one point you did like wrestle a bear. Could you like go into like what that experience was like and like if you won or my wife wanted to know if he had claws and like teeth and everything as well.
Yeah, so he did have teeth, but he was declawed.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things about the bear too is a lot of the wrestling bears back then, they would muzzle to prevent them from biting. But the people that trained this bear didn't muzzle the bear because they said the bears with muzzles would headbutt people. They couldn't open their mouth. They would headbutt them. So they trained this bear without a muzzle. And this bear was named Samson the Bear. And so the nightclub I worked at, so in pro wrestling, I wasn't doing it enough to make a living. So my main job was working as a bouncer in a nightclub in my hometown. And so the nightclub, it was a country and western bar or nightclub. They had live bands Thursdays through Saturday, but Sundays were usually too slow. So it really didn't make sense to hire a band. They would have been losing money, but they brought in different, special acts, on Sundays. And so they brought in this wrestling bear. And since I was a pro wrestler and I worked at the nightclub and I was one of the hometown guys, they thought that they would use me to market the event. So they took one of my wrestling promo pictures and put on these posters and put them up all around town to bring people in. It was open to anyone to wrestle. Anyone could wrestle the bear.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I was the only one that didn't get taken down. And if you see the picture, you can see where the bear's got a hold of my leg. So when I saw the other guys going up, they were standing like straight up and then the bear just swept their legs. So when I got up there, I got like a wrestling or lineman stance where he couldn't get a hold of my legs. He could get on my legs, but couldn't take me down. So I wrestled the bear twice that night. So the first time I didn't think I'd wrestle the bear again because it was too difficult. It was like trying to push a parked car. I mean, it was 750 pounds. So it's hard to do anything with this bear. I really wished I'd gotten more pictures. I really wished I would have one of the bartenders took the pictures. I really wish that I would have got the negatives or got more pictures, because there's one of the pictures, because at the time I was 240 pounds. My arms are like 20 inches flexed at the time. And so this bear, you see one angle where his head is like wider than my back. And so there's some really cool pictures, but I got the one which I thought was the best because he let me pick a picture. But how I know which time I wrestled the bear was the first time after I wrestled him, I was like, this is too difficult. I'm not going to do that again. So whoever did the best won the t-shirt that said, I wrestled Samson the Bear and lost, and also won a bar tab. And since I worked there, it was kind of a limitless bar tab. So after I kind of got through the bar tab and drinking for a while, the manager of the nightclub come around again and said, hey, would you wrestle the bear again? So this time I'm a little, intoxicated. So they come up and I agreed to wrestle the bear again. So this time it was kind of alcohol influenced, but, so I wrestled him again. How I can tell that that was the second time I wrestled him was that the t-shirt was yellow that I won. I had changed into that t-shirt. And so that's how I know from that picture that was the time that I wrestled him the second time.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. And there was no incidents or anything like he didn't headbutt, he didn't bite or anything at all.
He did kind of bite my finger. So like my ring finger was in his mouth and the trainer was saying, be still, I'll get your finger out. And I'm thinking, no, I'm getting my finger. I'm not going to let that bear bite my finger off. And I think it wasn't a serious incident. The bear wasn't aggressive. I think what happened is that bear had dealt with drunk people before, and maybe he smelled the alcohol and just that kind of triggered, bad memories or something. I just figured maybe something along that lines, or maybe I just was a little more aggressive and rough that time or something. But it's kind of interesting because if you look at the picture, you see the guy in the referee costume or referee shirt. He's like the trainer of the bear. And then there's someone even further back that's got a chain. They got a chain for a leash on this bear. So if the bear freaks out, this guy is going to kind of help retain the bear.
Is this guy big guy or like regular sized guy? He
was a decent sized guy. He was probably about 5'10" and 200 pounds or something, but he was kind of a real badass because the guy was a prison guard. So he was he worked at the prison in Fort Worth. They have a federal prison in Fort Worth, and he was on the prison riot squad. So anytime riots broke out in prisons, he was one of the guys they sent in. So, so he's kind of a tough guy, but yeah. So with these two guys, I'm really kind of glad he didn't freak out. And one of the things interesting that I thought about in hindsight was no one had ever taken this bear down before. What happened if someone did? That bear might freak out and hurt someone. So it's probably a good thing that I didn't. But an interesting fact, one of the things they told me that at that night that I did the best wrestling against that bear against anyone else. And there was a famous, I think he was New York Jets lineman named Joe Klecko from back in the 70s and 80s. And they told me that Joe Klecko had wrestled this bear and I actually did better than he did. So I was kind of surprised.
Very cool. Yeah. You'll make a t-shirt out of that, I think. So how did they even now we'll get into more. We're still like aspiring, living the childhood side and getting into the cybersecurity stuff. But like, I want to know, like, maybe that you spoke to the person that owned the bear. Like, how was it even legal that they're like, hey, we got a bear. Like, let's start making money off the bear and kind of thing.
Dude, it's just like in 80s and earlier, there was stupid stuff that's legal. I looked up recently wrestling bears, and I think there's only like a couple states in the United States that allow it. Texas doesn't even allow bear wrestling. There's a lot of states in the South which they do crazy stuff,
like Louisiana or something like this, or Oklahoma.
That they didn't allow. Yeah, that they didn't allow. It's kind of funny. Speaking of the Tiger King, he actually lived close to my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law is a big animal fan. And so when she kind of saw that he wasn't treating his animals well, she sent him a nastygram complaining about the way he's treating his animals.
That's terrific. This was in Oklahoma, right?
Yes, in Oklahoma. Yeah. Okay. Outside of Norman, Oklahoma. But anyway, yeah, I'm not sure where you probably can't wrestle bears other places because, a lot of and the good things, there's a lot of animal rights type things. And even at one time when they allowed stuff like that, the animal had to have a break, and just, I'm sure a lot of rules, kind of like you'd have, go out and smoke.
15-minute smoke break.
Yeah, that'd be pretty funny. The bear out behind the bar, smoking, drinking a beer, talking with a Russian accent.
Straight Russian accent. Yeah. He's like, "Hey, my brother, Fancy Bear, he's doing crazy things in Russia." That's good. All right. Yeah. All right. Well, very interesting. How do we now the progression to getting in the cybersecurity area? So, let's start. So, I was watching one of the videos that you had done, and I think you were talking about your book, and I think I got a little bit more information about your career path. So, we had a pro wrestler to, I think, a CAD drafter, and then shifting over to sysadmin and InfoSec, kind of more so. So, how'd you get from pro wrestling over to being the CAD drafter, and then moving towards the sysadmin work?
So what happened is when I got married in 1988, and when I got married, I just working in a nightclub, you didn't have healthcare insurance. So I really didn't have any benefits, and there really wasn't any future for job progression as a bouncer, and wrestling is just one of those things. If you get lucky, I mean, a lot of the guys that made it big suffered through a lot. You hear some of the stories, because actually I knew Stone Cold Steve Austin. We used to work out at the same gym in Denton, Texas. He was playing football at University of North Texas at the time. And one of the other pro wrestlers that worked out at the gym, I remember one time him asking us if wrestling was real. So of course, back then you had to say it was real. So I just had to get a better job, because like I said, these guys were suffering to be a pro wrestler. You hear stories about Steve Austin that he would go all week and he'd start running out of food. He'd have to go a day or two without food until they got paid. It wasn't a lot of money. Sometimes they could afford a hotel. Sometimes they were sleeping in their car. And so this was a really tough life. And, being married, that just wouldn't work out well. And I'm sure it would have, my marriage would have ended sooner if that would have continued. And then I see all these stories too about these wrestlers and like their relationships with their children, that they didn't have good relationships with their children and that type of thing. But at any rate, I had to find a better paying job with benefits. And so I worked manual labor, and manual labor was like the worst. I've dug ditches, put up fences, roofed houses, framed houses, working out in the hot Texas heat. I worked in restaurants as a cook, dishwasher, bussing tables, and all this. Never liked it. The one job I did like out of all that was working in retail sales. Wasn't bad, but I worked at a jewelry store, and I'm kind of a competitive person. This is kind of one of the things that helped me from powerlifting, was being competitive. I was always number one or number two in sales. And one of the things that kind of prompted me to do something else was the family that owned the jewelry store. They're Lebanese. They had a chain of jewelry stores called Nasser Brothers. And they wanted to open a big chain. They wanted to be like the next K Jewelers or something. So they opened Baldwin Jewelers. So they thought if it was a more American sounding name, it would be more conducive to building a brand and building out this jewelry chain. So they knew me because I had bought jewelry there for my ex-wife. And so they kind of knew me from the jewelry store. And so they asked me if I'd be interested in working for them. So they brought me on. The intention was to make me an assistant manager. But like I said, I was either number one or number two, one of the best salespersons in the jewelry store. But the guy that was the actual manager of the store kind of preferred the woman that was either my, second to me or first to me each time. And she deserved to be assistant manager as much as I did. He's the store manager. He preferred that. But one of the things I looked at is I need to find a career where politics is not going to prevent me from progressing. Although you got politics and cybersecurity, IT and everything. But the thing is, you can still make a good living. You don't have to be the assistant manager. You don't have to be promoted into management to do well. So one day I was watching television and they had a commercial come on for the American Trades Institute. And they were talking about their AutoCAD program, their CAD drafter program. So in high school, I took some drafting classes. As a kid, I used to love to draw, and I thought this sounds pretty interesting. So I ended up going to CAD school. So when I started CAD school, one of the lessons I like to share, especially for those people just trying to break in, I really had no exposure to computers. So I started CAD school in about 92 or 93. We had a computer at home. My father-in-law gave us this computer. And at the time, there weren't much online. You didn't have the internet. You had some of these services, like we had Prodigy, which Prodigy had some online games and stuff. And it's very limited what you could do. You could play some video games on the computer. So I really didn't know much about computers. And when I started CAD school, I was like the worst CAD computer skills wise, but I learned DOS, how to use computers in class. And by the time I got out in the workforce, most places I would work, I had better computer skills than my peers. And I found out I had more of a knack for the computer side of things. So whenever new versions of AutoCAD would come out, I would pick up on the new features first. Picked that up easily. Windows 95 was new. So I learned Windows 95. I worked at a company and our on-site IT person couldn't get Windows 95 to print on a Novell network. And I was able to figure it out and how to get it to work. So the first time I was ever called a hacker was at this company. The IT person was jealous because I could get it to work and he couldn't. So he called me a hacker. So I really realized that this was more interesting because one job I was at prior to that, we brought in someone to work on our Novell server and we were being billed at $30 an hour and we were making half of that, making $15 an hour. So this company that was working on our server was billing $50 an hour. So I thought he's making like $10 an hour more than me. And what he's doing seems a lot more interesting. So I started building computers. After I taught myself how to build computers, I took a Novell network operating system certification course, the old CNE, started taking that, a 90-day class. And I got hired on my first IT job. It was during the .com boom. So everyone was getting online. There was a lot of need for sysadmins. So I got my first job and it was interesting because the very first one I interviewed for, and it was interesting because the two guys that interviewed me were just so calm and laid back. I could not tell how I was doing in the interview, but first interview, got hired, got my first IT job. So I got my foot in the door. And one of the things I attribute to helps me is that people saw that I was ambitious and willing to learn. And I was, wanted to do the job, that I had passion. So it's one of the big things that helped me. It's not always the talent, but I got my first IT job and I spent a little over 6 years as a sysadmin, started getting interested in security, got my CISSP, got the NSA's InfoSec assessment methodology certification. And then I ended up getting my first job within the company I work for. In January 2004, I got to move over to the security team, started out doing like network security, risk assessments and vulnerability scans and that type of thing.
I have a question. How big was the company that you were working at? Because if they already have a security team, it sounds like they're pretty big and advanced for the time even, right?
It was pretty big because like in 2000, not a lot of companies had security teams in 2004. Because actually when I started at that company in 98, they didn't have a security team. They were just basically the network guys were managing the firewalls. And then over time they added, we're like a subsidiary, we're a mortgage company, we're a subsidiary of a bank. And they started integrating us more because the bank had acquired these mortgage companies, these mortgage branches. And then we finally, once we started integrating, they had a security team that had been around for a while. So that's one of the other lessons I like to share with people is if you're within a company and you want to move into another role, companies are more willing to take a chance on you because you've been there for a while. They know what your work ethic is like. There's good value in knowing that environment and then kind of understanding the business. So a lot of companies like to find people that have industry experience. So if you've worked in financial industry, sometimes that's a big plus. I'd worked there for a while, so I knew the systems. So that's something that a brand new person coming in could be experienced in security, but then they have to learn all the systems and all that environment, which I already had that edge. But fortunately, they promoted me. So one of the things I tell people is if you're trying to break in from IT into another IT role or trying to break into cybersecurity, sometimes companies will take a chance because you're there. You've been there for a while, and any good company is going to have a growth progression roles for you to be able to move into. And so that was really one of the things that helped me out there. So if I had went somewhere else, even though I had a CISSP, but I didn't really have security experience outside of servers, it would have been a lot more difficult to get the job. So sometimes it's best to try to break in to a different role or get promoted into different those areas within the organization where you're working at.
And then once you're inside of the organization, what do you feel is the best way to communicate that you're interested in the role other than like waiting for them to post on a job board?
Sure. One of the things I did was because I'd actually left the company for a while and then I came back. I came back as a contractor. When I came back as a contractor on the sysadmin team, by this time I was wanting to move into security because I'd had like a short-lived career with this company. I was supporting appliances that ran checkpoint firewall. So I was really interested in security, and I got laid off for that job and I went back to the mortgage company. Fortunately, they brought me back contract and I ended up going back full time, but it got to a point where there was an open position for the bank directly. And I went to Memphis to interview at the home office for that security role. And the director I worked for at the time over IT came back and said, you're going to have to decide whether you want to take the security role or do you want to work in, take this permanent job in IT. I can't hold it for you. So if you don't take it and you don't get the security role, then I can't hold it. So that kind of prevented me from doing that. But then they found out I was interested in security and I was securing the servers too. So I would create security templates and learning to lock down the server. So that's how they knew I was interested.
And you said over in Memphis, I think. So like, did you move outside of Texas or did you say this is all in Texas?
It was in Texas where I worked. This was just the home office. So I went there to interview because the CISO of the company was located there in Memphis.
Okay, got it. But the majority of the work and stuff that you've done, it's been mostly in Texas. Is that correct?
Yeah, most of the work I did was in Texas. I did travel some. So like whenever some of my first couple of IT jobs, we did travel a lot. So my very first job, we went around the country doing NetWare server installs and upgrades as well as Windows 95 installs.
So when you were doing that, was it like it'd be like on a project or contract basis where you'd go out there for like a few weeks or something like that and travel?
Yes. It was fun. It was a great experience because one of the things that I'd like to share here we're discussing this was it was just install. So we were basically migrating data. We're building servers. So I could build servers in my sleep, but I really didn't have the troubleshooting experience. So I did this and I, really prepared me for, sysadmin work. But when I was at the mortgage company, one of the things I ran into and I almost left because there were only 3 people on the sysadmin team. We're on call. The other people on the team were pretty junior. So if they were on call, they would call you. So you're really never off call.
Okay.
And that environment was very unstable at the time because I think at that time we hadn't switched over to Cisco switches. They were using these 3Com switches. They were very buggy. Our mail servers were really not optimal for the level of mail we were sending. We were using Novell GroupWise, and the way they handled the mail system, because the guy that I took it over from, he was leaving the company and said, now you're managing the GroupWise email system. But he said every day at lunch, you have to reboot the systems because they just didn't have enough resources. So this is the way things were run. Things were constantly crashing. It was not stable. We were constantly getting called in all hours of the night. And I was really close to quitting. But then I thought, I got a lot of installing experience from this past role. So I can install my sleep, but my troubleshooting experience is next to nothing. So I thought, as messed up as this place is, I stick it out, I'm going to be a lot better at my job. So I stuck it out. As a side effect, and as them adding more people and realizing that we had to add to the team because the director there, when I started, was fairly new. The original director that hired me left within that 2 weeks I gave my notice to the other company. Before I started, this new director came in. So he started bringing in more people, had a better idea how to run IT organizations. Before, they were just winging it. At one time, there was a group of guys doing desktop support, server support, and network support. They were doing it all. This other guy had a more modern idea of server people are going to do servers, network people do networking, desktop support will do desktop support, help desk will do their thing. So they kind of split it out, and things eventually got better. So I'm glad I stuck it out because I really got good at troubleshooting.
That's really interesting. You staying there to learn more about troubleshooting, you felt that in the future and any other types of roles and things that you have, you're going to need troubleshooting. Does that sound pretty accurate?
Definitely true. And say, like, for instance, if you don't start out as a sysadmin, say you're working in security, there's a lot of cases where you have to set up servers to run software. You know, there could be some logging servers, or, you know, maybe you've got, you know, other types of security software running. So understanding how to troubleshoot that, because, you know, some of the best experience of my whole career was that time I spent as a sysadmin. It helped me a lot as a pen tester and then working in security, because there were times I had to set up like some single sign-on software for applications. So I had to build the server, configure that. I had to know how to use Active Directory to get that to integrate. Or actually, we were still using Novell Directory Services. So understanding directory services to be able to set up that single sign-on was very helpful. And if I hadn't had that experience from my sysadmin days, it would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah, just like yourself and a lot of other people I've interviewed, it sounds like understanding like the lay of the land when it comes to being sysadmin, the servers, you know, the networking components, those are like critical. In today's world where almost every company is now using cloud architecture and stuff like that, do you feel that to get a foundational understanding about, you know, how to get started in cybersecurity, that it makes sense to learn some type of cloud environment? So since you're going to most likely be testing in that area and region in the future, or do you feel that the understanding servers on like an on-prem environment is just as valuable?
I think you need to do both, because, for instance, everywhere you go, you're going to have some type of workstation. Most of the time, it's going to be Windows. So understanding how that works can be important. So you really need to understand a hybrid, because there could be some cases that, you know, there's a lot of environments out there that are hybrid. You know, a lot of more your legacy companies that have been around for a while, they haven't totally gotten away with all the, you know, got rid of all the on-prem. So I'd understand both of it, because, you know, what happens if you ever went to work for Meta and you're working in that server environment? Yeah, it's cloud, but you're managing the cloud. The underneath piece of the cloud is the on-prem hardware and all that. So the underlying piece is still your traditional type of hardware and stuff, but you really need to do both and not overlook the cloud piece, because nowadays you really just have to have cloud. And one of the things I see is kind of in hindsight and a lesson that a lot of people like myself didn't really adopt the cloud soon enough. But, you know, me from being a pen testing, it wasn't as critical just to understand cloud to be able to do pen testing. But I really think if you're going to get far, you need to do that. And one of the things I think in some cases that can be an edge for you just starting out, if you understand the more modern technologies, you'll do better when there's cases that the people have been around longer just had adopted the newer technologies, and it'll kind of help you in cases that if you didn't have it, it might have been impossible to get in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree with that, because you still have the components of the on-prem as well as the cloud. I was recently at a healthcare facility here in Italy, and I was looking at their computer. I was like, you know, just glancing as we're having a conversation, and just looked at the computer, and I saw like on the bottom left. On the bottom left, they had the Windows icon, and it was like a circle. And I'm like, is that Windows 7? And I was like, no, I think that's Windows Vista. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm just terrified of this network immediately. But yeah, you have like, yeah, I think you probably have more vulnerabilities or areas of interest like on-prem than you do actually in the cloud. But having those older instances of things is just terrifying. So let me ask you this. You shifted over from doing sysadmin and then you got into InfoSec roles. Actually, no, before even getting into that, like in terms of like things just breaking and stuff like that, was this also during the time when you had like hubs and not even switches where like 50%, it could be 50% of packets are just crashing because they're sending it to everywhere? Or was this a little bit after that time?
There was some companies that may be doing that, because I mean, just like back from my AutoCAD days, we just had like, the old networks that had the coax cable that connected each computer. So you really wasn't plugging into a hub or whatever. This was, that was kind of a manufacturing focused company. So they're kind of behind on technology. Your financial institutions could be a little more up to speed. There was hubs out at the time, but, we were using switch in the organization. But yeah, back then it was really, kind of a prime target for hackers or pen testers, because you go in somewhere and you're doing a pen test and people are using hubs. You're able to easily intercept traffic and stuff. So back then, not everyone was using, SSL or TLS. They weren't using encryption. So this was clear text. Yeah. Clear text, FTP, just everything was in clear text. And so you just get on there. Nowadays, it's harder to do like man in the middle stuff. Cause like in, situations where you can do a man in the middle attack through Wi-Fi, do an evil twin attack. Back then, you're on a hub. It's just a lot easier than even once switches came about, encryption wasn't widely adopted either for a while. So it's kind of interesting. I saw a recent article a while back. Someone was kind of saying, yeah, really why are people worried so much about VPNs these days? Because a lot of cases it's encrypted traffic. And so, but it's just kind of interesting back in those days where encrypted traffic wasn't the norm. It would have been interesting to be a pen tester at that time, because I think it would have been pretty easy because, like I said, no encryption and
no encryption. Plain text, FTP, clear text, everything.
And some really weak passwords because I remember working at the mortgage company, we had some AS400 systems. And when we were securing things, there were limitations of what you could do. You couldn't enforce password policies like on AS400. So you couldn't enforce limitations. I think in some cases you may not be able to use special characters. So some of the things around then made things a lot more vulnerable. So it's really a good thing things have evolved the way they have, because if it was still that way today, there would be like 10 times the breaches that there are now.
Yeah, we're very fortunate that like so much shifting in security, and now like you can't even talk about like, setting up a company without mentioning some levels of security, due to a lot of regulations and other types of things, which I think is significantly helpful now. So how did you shift from doing it? It sounded like you were doing more InfoSec stuff, and then you started going more into AppSec eventually. How did that transition happen?
Sure. What happened was it was kind of most of the things I did through my career was because I was interested in, because I was, AutoCAD, I got interested in IT, doing sysadmin work, and got interested in security. I kind of followed what I wanted to do, but I really, one of these cases, this organization I work for, they hired a new CISO. And when the CISO came in the company, he's worked with more modern companies, had a better idea of how organizations should be ran. So we got split up into different areas. So originally we had the IAM team that was setting up user credentials. Some of these people are usually less technical, more help desk backgrounds, but then the rest of us, we were people doing the firewall administration and all that. So I got put on the AppSec team because we didn't have application security. So I got put on the AppSec team. So that was really pivotal for me becoming a pen tester, because when I was working in AppSec, I managed our third-party pen tests. We had consultants do our pen testing. I managed the remediation and the scheduling of those pen tests, and that's how I found out about it, and that's where I got interested. So a lot of the classes and stuff I took training-wise early on in my cybersecurity career is I wanted to be a pen tester. So I took one of the last ones I took before I got a pen testing role was I took the CEH. I didn't take the exam, but even before that, I don't know if you've heard of the company Foundstone. They actually got acquired by McAfee. So they used to be a security consulting company. They perform pen tests. They create a lot of free tools. So a lot of back then in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the pen testing tools were Windows based. And so the Foundstone guys or people went on to found CrowdStrike, Mandiant, all these big companies because they had sold out to McAfee. But I took their ultimate hacking course. They were the authors of the Hacking Exposed books that were pretty popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. So actually, whenever I took the ultimate hacking course created by them, they had just got acquired by McAfee. So that's when I took some of that training. So it really got me interested in the pen test side of things, and working in application security got me interested in pen testing because I got to run some vulnerability scans. And
what year was this?
So whenever I first got into AppSec was like 2005. It was about September of 2005. And then the AppSec job lasted up until March of 2012 when I got laid off. And so this is really how
2012. So it was through the boom. It was through the dot-com boom. You were still able to hold a job around then, as well as the U.S. economic like downshift for the real estate market. You were still holding it down. And then the apps, like primarily, was it like web applications or like any applications that they were running?
It was mainly web application. And so then, like we're getting ready to we're going to be laid off because they'll give us 90 days notice and we got severance. So they came up and told us at one point, because see, we got acquired by MetLife. We were under MetLife Bank and they got a new CEO. And then after the mortgage, all this stuff with the mortgage in like 2008 to 2010 or something, he came back and he said that he didn't want his shareholders to not profit. And they were getting rid of the mortgage division. And so we kind of knew that they were going to either sell off or close it down altogether. So we kind of had the heads up and I started looking for a job. And I saw that Verizon had a role on their security consulting team for a pen tester. And I just took my chance and applied for it. Another lesson for listeners here trying to break into pen testing or other roles in cybersecurity. I didn't have all the skills I needed. I'd taken a couple pen testing courses. I didn't know how to hack. I'd run some vulnerability scanners and web app vulnerability scanners, but I really have all the skills that I needed. I had sysadmin experience, but I was interviewing with this hiring manager and I shared with him, he got a glimpse of my passion once again, that I was passionate about self-learning. I taught myself web design. So I used to do web design as a side business. So
Dreamweaver or something else entirely?
Actually, I was using Dreamweaver. Yep. Yeah. Cause I actually had all the macro, it was back when it was Macromedia.
Yeah. Macromedia. Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. I had Flash, the whole suite. And so I started, and I'd kind of share with him that I built my own web server. I was hosting all the websites for my customers at home. And so when he saw that was a self-learner, his whole thing was he would always tell us when we're trying to learn to build something. You know how to build it, you know how it works. So you're able to secure it or assess the security of it. So, we really clicked and he saw the potential. So fortunately I got hired. So like back to anyone that's trying to break in, if you don't have the big laundry list of all the prerequisites for the job, apply for it anyway. There's more that goes into getting the job, like being able to fit in personality wise with the team. Just like his whole motto and concept was, build things. And so he saw that I had that same mindset. So seeing that you're willing to learn and you want to do it, because one of the things too, and not say you have to just obsess over your career, but people want you to be interested in your job. They want someone that's coming to work to be there. And it's not all just about the paycheck, and you're going to do better if you really enjoy what you're doing. So anyone trying to find jobs in cybersecurity, find something you're passionate about. You can always change roles, but as long as you're enjoying it, it's like you're getting paid to have fun, and you're going to do a lot better than if you're doing something you don't want to do.
Yes, this is terrific advice. I always recommend it, as well as like, when you're doing your application, you're applying and stuff like that. If it's a company that you really care about, you should be able to at least write a page about why you're interested in their company, or even express like, what are you doing outside of the regular work experience that you want to include. So I think you had mentioned in your one of your episodes was that, you had labs, right? So you can write that in a cover letter. You can actually supply non-work experience into your submission and your application and stuff like that. And it goes a long way, because I agree 100%. Everything that you were like saying, and now and your other podcast, I'm like, yeah, this guy he's got a strong head on his shoulder when he understands that, it's what you're doing outside of work that almost means more than what you've done at work, because it shows like, are you actually passionate about cybersecurity? Like, do you enjoy it, or is it kind of like a 9-to-5 where you can like call it a day once you go home? Because, cybersecurity, other jobs you can call it 9-to-5, but cybersecurity is one of those jobs where you have to be pretty vigilant and skill building, and you have to kind of like expand and learn and not just settle, because it changes significantly faster than almost any other type of industry.
Yeah. One of the things I'd say too, a couple comments to add to that, with the labs and all that, we're kind of in an age where used to is just graphics designers and artists and musicians that need a portfolio, but now security professionals really need a portfolio, especially those trying to break in. Documenting any of your learning process is important. And then back to like the 9-to-5 folks, you can be a 9-to-5er, but you're going to have a solid work ethic, because I know some people that do really well, that when it comes, not to say that they don't work overtime and weekends sometimes, but when it's time to be done with work, they kind of let go of work and do other things to enjoy their life. But you really just have to have a really rock solid work ethic. And that's kind of like my wife. She's one of those people like that. I go to conferences for fun, and she went to conferences when she's first starting out, but she's got like one of the best work ethics of anyone I know. She'll put in the hours she needs to. She's not goof around. She's really maximizing her time on the clock. So when, any kind of education stuff she's learning in her spare time at work, it can be done, but it's more difficult. I think, kind of the page we're on that you learn outside of work, that's the easiest way, in my opinion, to excel. But if you're going to depend on those hours on the clock, you got to have a really good work ethic and really good time management to be able to balance that.
Exactly, and that's where our company, Top Cleared Recruiting, comes in. Finding the right cybersecurity talent with the necessary clearances can be a major hurdle. Did you know that it could take 8 to 15 months on average to hire somebody with a TS SCI plus full polyscope? At Top Cleared Recruiting, we have a network of 1.3 million cleared professionals ranging from C&O developers, reverse engineers, and data scientists. Whether you're working on offensive operations or data analysis, we connect you with the elite talent you need fast. Visit topclearedrecruiting.com and let us help you to find the perfect candidate already cleared and ready to go. Yeah, I've been an entrepreneur for so long, so there's no clock. It's just you're just grinding, and like it's more like the time you're not grinding, you just actively feel you're failing. So like I'm just like, man, I really could be doing this instead. So and I've been in startup world for so long, so it's always been like, yeah, you have 9 to 5, but like before you come in, you need to do this. And like after work, like you should probably be considering and looking at this and researching it. So like when you come to work, that's when it's like game mode or whatever. So, and as I'll say this, like if you're younger, like in your early 20s, 30s, I'm in my 30s now, I'm getting a little tired, but if you're early 20s, late 20s, like you could probably grind it. Once you get a little bit older, it's a bit more, I don't say challenging, but it takes more effort to do it.
It does get more difficult because like when I was going through the OSCP certification, which was in 2012 to 2013, I was still in my late 30s. No, I was like in early 40s or something like that. But now that I'm in my late 50s, it's really hard to stay up really late. But
you're late 50s, you cannot tell, man.
59. It was easier back then to stay up late, and it's getting a little more difficult because, for many years I would stay up till 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, get, a few hours sleep and then go to work. But also too, I was really, motivated and really enjoying learning to pen test. So, but it gets more difficult as you get older. So take advantage, like you said, when you're younger, when you can stay up later, be more sleep deprived. It's not going to affect you as much as when you get older.
Yeah, definitely. Like even like, I'll sometimes like just stay up all night and be like, I just want to research stuff. I want to look around, play, just see stuff. And it's okay if you do that and then like spend like an hour just like goofing off or whatever, and then start researching more stuff, because that's still like an extra like good amount of time. There's this ridiculous quote. I'm gonna say this for like the people that have the energy and are young that can do it, but it's like the weekend is a 40-hour work week with 2 4-hour naps or something like that. So like you just want to grind. All right, so you also created the DEF CON group 940. Can you kind of go into like what inspired you to do that and like how you were able to set that up, and like where you were also at in your career in terms of like, have you already gone to DEF CON before and like gone to conferences, spoke and things like this?
Yeah, kind of to share that, kind of really what started all that and motivated that was in 2018. I started teaching at Dallas College. I started teaching pen testing because in the fall semester of 2017, my wife had went back to school because she got laid off from a job working for a software company. And she was, learning some new skills to get into digital forensics. And her instructor said, we're going to start an ethical hacking class in the spring if we can find an instructor. So my wife said, hey, my husband's a pen tester. So I forwarded him my resume, got hired sight unseen on the spot.
Wow.
And so I got to build out the class. And so that was life-changing for me. In 2018, I really changed my focus because my wife has been a big inspiration for me. So my wife used to teach an ESL class. So she got to help a lot of people that were undocumented citizens here in the US they trusted her. And just the way she impacted and helped those people's lives, I thought, if I look at my legacy right now, I've got my daughter I'm very proud of, my family, my career, my certifications, but who's going to remember me when I'm gone? That's not enough to be remembered over. And so I took a page from her book, got inspired, and started teaching at the college. And that's when I really turned my focus towards mentoring and helping others. I've always been a competitive person, always goal oriented. And one of the things I'll say about pen testing, I'll never claim I was ever the best pen tester or close to it. I did a good job, but I always put so much focus into my career in this. And so then I just kind of decided I want to help others. So I started, because I decided, I figured, was just pondering this idea that, the world needs more coaches and mentors and teachers. And I thought that's an important part. And this was something that come easy for me that I adapted to. So I started teaching at the college. The inspiration to start the meetup groups was I had a couple of young people in our community that they were going to school at different colleges. They were wanting to sign up for my pen testing course at Dallas College. And they weren't able to get in for the summer semester was getting ready to start, and they couldn't get everything transferred in time and enrolled to take the class. So I kind of decided I wanted to start something, a way for people to get education regardless of the money they have or, anything like that, that there's no reason for them not to. They just show up and they can learn. And so I started an organization called the Pwn School Project, or Pwn School for short. Started this back in like June of 2018. And so being part of the Dallas community and going to Dallas Hackers Association, very first meetup, we had over 100 people show up. But so like during that time, my whole focus had been changing. And it's funny because it was really by 2018, everyone was amazed at how I shifted in the things I was doing community-wise, because I started this meetup group, ran a meeting in Dallas, Texas, started a second one in August of 2018 in my hometown of Denton, Texas. And so I was running 2 meetings a month. And then also,
I have a question about that. Did you were you in charge of in total control of both sides, or did you have somebody else in Denton be like, hey, I'm going to need some heavy lifting here?
I was totally in control over both of those.
Ooh,
although I did have the ones in Dallas, people, I could get help from time to time, or if I asked for it, I'm just one of these people that don't ask for help. The Denton meetups, one of the reasons I started that was my hometown. One of my friends worked at this company in Denton, so I got to meet some of his coworkers. So I knew there wasn't a community in Denton, Texas. So I started the second group. So I was running 2 meetings a month. So in Denton, starting out, I had, these 3 friends that were helping me set up the chairs and stuff for the meetings and stuff. But it was mostly me running it down towards. During the pandemic, we had to switch to all virtual because there was no places allowing any kind of meetings. So we went to virtual. We continued virtual through the pandemic. Once we got back able to do things in person back in 2021, like around, I think it was around October or so, 2021, we got back to in person. And I only started back up with the Denton meetings because there was already several meetings in Dallas. So there were options, and just the dealing with 2 different meetings. I got kind of busy over time by the time it got through the pandemic and hosting these meetings. Because when I first started hosting these meetings, I was working my day job and teaching at night. So I had a lot of time to do things. So in October of 2022, end up rebranding as it's either 2022 or 2021, that rebranded as a DEF CON group. And part of the rebranding as a DEF CON group was to bring brand awareness, because we had the first month after rebranding as a DEF CON group, we had like twice the attendance. And because people could look up DEF CON groups and find it. People aren't going to know about Pwn School. It's harder through my marketing and people meeting me, and some of the people that are members, or through Meetup, they might be able to find it, but it's a little more difficult. So people are always looking for DEF CON groups, local DEF CON groups, so they're able to find us. And so a second part of that.
Oh, sorry. Just to jump in. So what made you did you have any thought about doing a B-sides group, or you were just like, I want to do DEF CON because this is a better branding?
Yeah, B-sides is just conference, not to downplay it. It's a conference. B-sides are for conferences, so you do an annual conference. So that's kind of why I went with the DEF CON group. The second reason with rebranding was also the fact that I knew I wasn't going to run this group forever. And when I got ready to step down, I didn't want to hand over my intellectual property, my idea of Pwn School, hand that off to someone, because if anything down the line ever went bad, it could come back to me. So I thought with the local DEF CON group, if someone running it messes it up, the overall people that oversee the DEF CON groups are going to say, hey, you're going to stop this. You got to step down or whatever. And there's something there for them to deal with. But over the past year or so, Papa Sheldon, one of my co-hosts, he got more active in bringing in speakers and was doing a lot to run the meetups. And it just really got to where it was running pretty well without me. And so I just actually back in November stepped down from the group because I got so busy with other things. For me, whenever I got into this, I wasn't a podcaster. I am now. I do a lot of public speaking. I like to teach. This is where I bring value. It's a better way for me to share and help others than running a meetup group. I built something and I'm very proud of it, and it's continued on. There wasn't any kind of security community in Denton, Texas, and we're having like 20, 25 people a month. We've got one of the universities in North Texas. A lot of their students are actively involved, coming to the meetings. So I built it, and it's time to pass it off. And I have to kind of give myself credit because I cling on to things and it's hard to give up sometimes. If I'm doing this, it's hard to pass it off. And so I pass it off as in good hands, and everyone likes the guys that are hosting it, Sheldon and Rick that are running it. They all like those. They're kind of local to the area. They're closer. For me, I was having to drive in from Carrollton to Denton, which is over 30 miles, and the traffic can be kind of bad at times. So just balancing all that. But like I said, it's in good hands, and me speaking and teaching, and that's a better fit for me. I'd rather speak at a meeting than host a meeting.
I guess in the earlier days, you were the one like giving all the talks and things like this in the beginning, and now it's just now they're doing the hosting and stuff like that. Is that right?
So the interesting thing with the Dallas meetings, I had people right off the bat were volunteering to present. So I did speak some at those meetings, but not as frequently. For the meetings in Denton, I spoke probably the first 2, maybe 3 meetings. And then I kind of realized people are going to get tired of just me and then doing the speaking all the time. And so we started bringing on, guest speakers and stuff. And it's really grown. We started out in a library, but after the pandemic, or while the pandemic's still kind of going on, people could meet in person. The library wasn't letting groups meet. So fortunately, David Evenden in the Denton area owns a consulting company called Standard User Consulting, and he let us use his office there on the square there in downtown Denton. We're using it for a while, but one of the things we kind of started looking at is some of the other meetups that have been successful. And the meeting I used to run in Dallas was successful. We're at a restaurant, so it was food and drinks. So it didn't interfere with people not showing up. Yeah. So that way you've got food and stuff. So fortunately, Rick was aware of this one new restaurant opened up in the square. It's an Italian restaurant. So they've got a basement, which they refurbished. So we meet down there. So it's been a nice change. There's food and, library closed like at 9:00 or earlier. So we had to get out there sooner, and it just works out. Then we're staying do our meetings at the other person's office. He had volunteers sticking around, interns sticking around to lock up. So we really don't want to keep them around long. And then like people go somewhere later or stand outside and chat afterwards. And so now being at the restaurant, people can sit around and talk and have drinks and stuff after the meeting and still continue on. And I had to shut it down.
That sounds like it went significantly better. I was, when I was in school, I started the hacking club at San Francisco State University because there was no students knew about like cybersecurity, like what to do. So I was like, let me build this, and just I did something similar. I was like, I gave like, I think 1 or 2 talks, like one talk and then one workshop. And then I was like, I'm going to pull in people from industry and have them speak because they're going to be more passionate about like what it is that they're doing. They're bringing more real world value in. So I started doing that. And that's when, it got kicked off, and then I passed it down to other people as well. Because I got another job. Yeah.
Yeah. That just kind of made me think of something because I wanted to share. So one of the things that really kind of got me interested in, or kind of drove the way I do my podcast, was when I teach my classes, I would share a lot of my stories, and the students would say, hey, can you bring in some of your friends from the industry? We really enjoy your stories. We want to hear more. And so that kind of guided the way I did my podcast. One of the reasons I do my hacker origin stories to share how people got in. I like to do the podcast where it's helpful to new people as well as people who've been in it for a while. And then, having people share those hacker origin stories. So that was kind of the influence of the podcast, is bring other people on to share their stories, because, that helps motivate people. And one of the things I like to compare it to is, if you ever see in sports when some record's been there for a long time and then all of a sudden someone breaks that record, then everyone's breaking the record. All of a sudden it just seems like nothing is easy. And it's not really because people really, people did improve overall, but it was really more of a case of people being proven to them they could do it. And when you have the confidence and think you can do something, you're going to do a lot better. And that's part of the reason of having people share those different stories to help encourage others. Because, someone came from some non-traditional background. And that's one of the reasons I share my wrestling story when I do career talks, that, I didn't know anything about computers when I very first started, and all this. And so I share those stories to help motivate others. And so that's kind of part of the reason I do the hacker origin stories during the podcast.
So the hacker origin stories, it's one of my favorite things to hear, is like how people got into cybersecurity. You have a lot of, because all of them are like different. And then as I'm doing more of the entrepreneurs and like how they shifted and created like a technology company, a lot of them like started in sales or had something related to here, because being able to like build anything, you have to be able to sell it. And it's very interesting to hear like how people started. If I may ask, like, what age were you when you got into cybersecurity?
So when I got into cybersecurity, I guess,
InfoSec.
Yeah. So when I got in, it was probably, let's see. So I was like around 38.
I feel like some people, like, at least, if they're considering reconsidering a career or something like that, they might just be like, I feel I'm too old, or I won't be able to do this. So, starting at 38 is fucking amazing.
Well, what's even more amazing is I've got one of my friends, one of my best friends. I helped him get his first pen testing job, and he was like 50 when he started.
Really?
Yeah.
What experience or things did he have prior to help him get in there, or did he have anything else that he had to learn?
He had he was working in cybersecurity, but then also he had like over 20 something years worth of experience in IT. So he actually got into IT a little bit before I did, but I didn't stay in IT as long as he did. So I was a sysadmin for like a little over 6 years. And so he was in IT for, I think he moved into security until like 2015 or so. So whereas I moved in like, several years, quite a bit earlier than he did.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. In the same vein of, wanting to help and give back, this is the first time I'm mentioning this publicly, and, with your story about like how you wanted to give more back to the community. I've been thinking like of recently and like how much I've really, really have enjoyed this like podcasting experience. So like I want to like kind of share this joy with other types of people and stuff as well. Recently I went to my mother-in-law. She wanted us to come to a church event, so we went, and she had been helping in disabled or like a special needs children and stuff like that. So we were there and helping her and stuff like this, and being around this environment and other types of things. I was like, really, I want to like give more back as well. So like, currently living in Italy, but we're planning to move back to the United States pretty soon. And the idea that I have is like I want to share like this type of experience where you're podcasting and interviewing with like maybe like terminal children and stuff like that. So like working at like children's hospitals and saying like, hey, who do you want to speak to? Whatever. And like maybe making some like level of like podcast or introductory thing where they're able to speak and like, hey, who do you want to talk to? And like have them have a conversation and something like that, just so they can like, be closer to, people that they feel like they're a little bit farther, kind of like Make-A-Wish, but more like having a conversation as well. So, and sharing that experience. Something I think would be really nice. I want to like maybe like set up like a nonprofit and then just show up to children's hospitals and be like, hey, I want to like see who they want to talk to. Maybe I can reach out to somebody and like have a conversation and see if they can have a conversation with somebody that they want to speak to. Because like, I don't know, just being able to ask and like freely speak about like what you're interested in or like how things are going and talking about life, I think it's like, I don't know, it's very inspiring. I love having these interviews. I've even thought about like just having more outside of just hackers to founders, whether it be other people as well, just to have a conversation, because I don't know. It's super inspiring when you're talking to people that are really inspiring. I'm also listening to like Tim Ferriss's podcast. I didn't even know he had one until recently. Obviously I know the 4-Hour Work Week. I was like, oh, like he interviews Arnold. Oh, and there's some really good interviews and stuff like that. And I've been listening to a lot of his stuff and his style and other types of podcasters. And it's like, with my niche of like, because I'm doing like hackers, entrepreneurs and like investors and things like that, people that are like growing in cybersecurity, like just as like somebody who wants to meet more and more people, it's like I want to like maybe make another podcast where I just interview other people outside of this entirely.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Honestly, because I used to do the Hacker Factory through ITSP Magazine, I went independent. But one of the things I did and kept in mind, because some of my friends, I asked, what should I call it? And they said, well, you have a well-established brand, use your name, but also thought at the same time too, the Phillip Wylie show doesn't have to be cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually had someone on that is a personal trainer at my gym, and I've known him for many years. And he had an interesting story because he's got like a meditation practice now.
Uh-huh.
And he had like a really interesting story. So I had him on because I know meditation, that stuff is good for your mental health. So I had him on. And so I just kind of thought, I can have people on there not necessarily in cybersecurity. So it seems like if you're really wanting to get a really big audience, if you find stuff that's not so niche, you got a bigger opportunity for growing, because not everyone's going to be interested in a cybersecurity podcast.
No, not at all. But I guess my biggest concern, and I think speaking to you, because you're successful in this already, is like, how will it be if I like expand out and in terms of like marketing or eventually doing sponsorships or things like that? Like, I feel if I expand out to like the Everything podcast, then I'm like competing with Joe Rogan and I'll just get crushed.
I would keep both going. I'd keep what you got going on here and then add like a secondary one. So that way, if, it doesn't affect the current listeners, because say like if you kept the same podcast and you start bringing on different kinds of guests, maybe people may not like it and it affect your viewership. So I think if you keep doing this one and then do a different one, kind of keeping it separate, because then sponsorship wise, people will sponsor this. They may not want to sponsor some of the other stuff. But kind of speaking of podcasters, I'd like to watch different podcasters, but some of those people have such long shows. It's really hard. I kind of skip through stuff, but like one of my favorite ones, and it's very inspirational, is the Diary of a CEO podcast.
Ooh, okay. I'll take a look at this one as well. Is it short form or is it kind of long?
It's long. It's like maybe up to 2 hours, but he's got all sorts of guests across all sorts of industries. So he's had people on that were,
yeah, I've seen this guy. Yeah. His short form content. And I'm like, this is really interesting, but I haven't like gone through, but everything that he talks about, I find it very fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Same. He's like one of my favorite podcasters.
He wrote a book too. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. You wrote a book too. Impact 3. We'll go on the podcasting stuff. Then I want to talk about the book stuff, because I want to write too.
Okay.
And I want to learn about like that process and everything else. But as far as podcasting, yeah. So, content, the length of the content. So yeah, mine's obviously are like 2 hours, like an hour, 2 hours and stuff like that. And I do that so we can then cut it up and make clips and then push it on short form content and just like push out as much. So we'll have one episode, and then we will do, 3 pieces of content per platform. And we have like 7 or 10 platforms that we do. So I think it's like total, we do like 210 pieces of content a week. And my wife's the one who actually does all of the content delivery and stuff like that, captions, everything. She's like the digital marketer for the podcast and stuff like that. So I'll do the production, I'll do the editing, and then I pass it over to her and she'll do everything else and stuff. So like we'll bounce different content ideas back and forth. And then we'll come up with different types of things. But she's like grinding and learning more about the digital marketing side of stuff, what works, what doesn't work, and what we can try. And I'm like grinding on like the production side, the editing side, and then as well as like learning more about the sponsorship side and things like that. So how have you, what are some of the challenges and things that you wish you knew when you first started your podcast?
One of the things I really wished I would have known before I started my second podcast. So I'm still trying to get the following back up. So like I said, it's hard to let go of some things sometimes. And that's kind of why it was kind of hard to leave podcasting, doing the other podcast, because one of the things I walked away from is, man, I had like the time I quit podcasting, I had like 160,000 all-time downloads. And this was over 2 years. I had like 1,200 or 1,200 views a week, 1,200 podcast downloads a week. And the big mistake I made, I wish I would have done differently, was once I quit podcasting for that platform, now I don't have any way to connect to these people unless they were following me on social media. So if I had to do over again, I would have started a newsletter.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
A newsletter or some kind of community outside of that company I was podcasting through. So that way I still had a way to communicate with people and let them know, you like the podcast. We're starting out here. It's same show, but video too. And just a different name.
That makes sense. Yeah, we're playing with the idea of setting up a newsletter. We probably are going to do a newsletter. I think we'll probably drop that in like the next month or two. We have a Discord community right now, but it's pretty mild. Like there's maybe like one or two people that like joined since listening, but in general, like our numbers are really low anyways. But the other thing that I did recently was I made like this group on Discord. It's called the Hackers Press. What do they call it? Associated Hackers Press, and it's just anyone that does content creation for cybersecurity and stuff like that. I'll invite you as well, but basically content creators, podcasters, people like this to like share ideas, marketing strategies, things that's working, what's not working, kind of thing, just so we can like kind of figure things out as we go. And I've been trying to like be sharing as much as like the things that we're doing and stuff. All right, cool. Let's see. So we talked about podcasting. Is there any additional questions or things you want to chat about the podcasting era? The sponsorship stuff. So like the sponsors contact you, or did you said your first few ones contacted you and then you put some price points out. Then you, then you created a media kit and then you want to start launching and pushing more sponsors requests out. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I got like one of my first sponsors around Black Hat and DEF CON last year, because I just started the podcast in April and I got my first sponsor. And then the other ones had just come to me. I had that same sponsor has sponsored me 3 times. And then I had 2 new sponsors and they've all come to me. But one of the things I've done was collaborating with other podcasters. I was able to figure out someone that's a friend of mine has been getting sponsors for longer. So I was able to see kind of what I should be charging and create a media kit, because all these individuals were asking for media kits. So one of the things I had to do with my media kit too, that the fact that I have quite a few followers on LinkedIn and Twitter, I took in consideration my social media. So when I had my media kit created, I had a combination podcaster and cybersecurity influencer media kit. So that way people can know that it's more than the listeners and viewers of the podcast you're going to get reach to. I've got a lot of reach on social media. And so I was able to leverage that. And I think that's really important when you're starting out. If you don't have much of an audience, is just kind of showing people the other ways that you have of getting their message out there, because that was kind of, if I just did it based on numbers and stuff, it'd be a little more harder to sell. But the fact that if you're a sponsor of my podcast, then people are going to get visibility to your brand before they even watch the podcast. So it brings more value, because there could be some people out there that have a decent listener audience and they have to be subscribed to the podcast. But if they're not, and they miss that episode, whereas people may not even be subscribed to my podcast, but they're going to see me sharing the episodes on social media.
Interesting. So yeah, you leverage the other followers that you have on maybe LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, wherever else that they can see, and then say like, we'll also be able to reach these channels as well. That's really interesting. So like I've seen in terms of like businesses and podcast, or not even just podcasts, but like content creation, TikTok, on Instagram and stuff like that. A lot on TikTok, you have these like content creating influencers in cybersecurity, and it seems like they just like their goal is to like make money on their community, and all they want to do is like create content of like, oh, this is how you run InMap, or like this is how you do this, and then they build up this branding around them being a quote unquote expert, or whatever the case is. And then all the people that follow them are people that are like, don't know anything about cybersecurity, or have just like started learning a little bit about cybersecurity stuff, they build up because that's the biggest amount of audience members and that are interested in cybersecurity that I've noticed. It's those people that aren't in it but want to be in it. They'll mass this up and then they'll build like a training or a boot camp or something and sell that, and then help them try to get into workforce and stuff like that. I don't know, like personally, I don't know if I want to build up an audience to like be able to specifically just like help them get into cybersecurity, because like and then build up the courses around it. I want to start like producing more technical or deeper level content or stuff like that if I build up an audience, or the entrepreneur side of things as well. So I guess my question to you would be, do you feel like it's valuable to build up like different levels of communities outside of just the introduction level of stuff? Or do you think it's even better to like just start and like get the people that are interested in cybersecurity to like build up the numbers that you have and then shift over to doing more entrepreneur level things? And if you don't know, that's fine too.
I think it's good because actually kind of the way the path I took, because prior to teaching and doing a lot of stuff for people that are trying to break in, I was just sharing information on pen testing and stuff. And the way I originally started sharing content was just different meetups, social media, sharing with other people trying to break in. And one of the things I kind of seen was I needed to not focus on just the beginners, because that kind of limits your audience, because if you want to speak at some of these bigger conferences, they may not want to hear a career talk. So I kind of got two different audiences. And one of the things I've kind of learned too is speaking on pen testing. A lot of my content was basically on starting a career, because the Pen Tester Blueprint, my book, started out as a class lecture. And the first time I gave it was in January of 2018. By November of 2018, at our local B-Sides conference, B-Sides DFW, I gave it as a conference talk for there the first time. Started giving it a bunch of times, and it was like, not a lot of good, a lot of good books out there on pen testing, but no one really showed you what you needed to do to build that base, that prerequisite knowledge before you start pen testing. So I found kind of a niche there, but then also learned after a while that a lot of what I know about pen testing, even at a less technical level, just a high overview, is valuable to people on the defensive side. It's valuable to managers. It helps them to be a better consumer. If they need someone to do pen testing, it's really better if they know the difference between true red teaming and pen testing, because you want someone to come in and do a red team. That's a totally different thing. Technically, it really is. It's been generalized. So knowing those differences have been very helpful. So the talks I've been giving over the past couple of years have been really focused on that. The first talk I called Offensive Security Awareness, which is basically telling people the difference between, different types of security assessments, pen testing and red teaming and purple teaming. And then I expanded that talk this year to include some of the common gaps that you see and how to overcome those gaps. So it's stuff that's educational, but it's not necessarily beginner or newbie focused, but I was able to reuse a lot of that same content and concepts in a different way. So you really kind of, I think, as a security professional, it's good to appeal to the beginners and say, like, there's some people that make careers off of just education stuff, but I want to be relevant to more than just the beginner people, because some people, they've been in the industry for a while, may perceive you as just, that you don't have that much depth, that, you're just not really that skilled. So I really don't want that to be the perception.
That is like my, like that's the fear I live with every night when I go to sleep. I'm like, damn, am I technical enough when I'm doing my cybersecurity stuff? Okay. All right. Excellent. And then, let's see. So we talked about the podcasting stuff. There was the other part I wanted to mention, your book. So let's talk about how the book came to be. I think you said that they came to you. Is that correct?
Yes. So what happened was, I was in the Tribe of Hackers Red Team book, and the Tribe of Hackers was authored by Marcus Carey and Jennifer Jen. They came out with the first Tribe of Hackers, and it's just basically interviewing people from the cybersecurity community, and they'd ask them a series of questions, and they published it as a book. And then they decided to get specialized, and they did like a Tribe of Hackers Red Team edition, Tribe of Hackers Blue Team, and then they had one for management, which was very popular. So whenever I was in that book, I shared on social media that I was featured in the Tribe of Hackers, and the publisher said, "Hey, do you have any book?" Send me a message on LinkedIn. Do you have any book ideas that you're interested in writing? And so I had wanted to turn the Pen Tester Blueprint into a book, because when I gave that talk, it was my lecture the first semester, each class, each semester that I would go in and tell students, this is what pen testing is. This is what it takes to become a pen tester. And that's where it came from. And then, like I said, I turned into a conference talk in November 2018. And I gave that talk a bunch of times because like in 2020, when everything shut down because of COVID, I was giving a lot of virtual talks. So I gave that talk a lot of times and kind of realized that, this would be a good idea to turn it into a book. So they reached out to me. So I got the contract probably about October of 2019, September, October, started writing the book. And as originally, I got the contract on my own. It was my concept. But one of the issues I was running into was I write straight and to the point. I don't write a lot of fluff.
Right. Writing, you got to write a lot of fluff for like paint the picture, the massive different level of storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah. They wanted more, they needed more pages in the book. So I brought on a co-author to help finish out the book. So I was 80% done with everything that was needed to learn how to become a pen tester. And I just brought someone on to help that was a writer that did a lot of blog writing stuff to help finish off the book. And that's kind of where that came about.
How did you find your co-author?
I knew her from the cybersecurity community on Twitter.
Okay, got it. So you brought in somebody that you knew personally to help you with the book. How is the financial setup for the book? Did you have to pay for them to publish it, or was it like percentages that were shared after that were created and you get allotted some of that? And then were you also able to put it on like Amazon, Audible, as well as like other types of things?
So they basically give you royalties on it. So you don't have to pay anything. Now, if you do self-publish, then you're responsible for paying for all that. It's one of the difficulties there. And one of the things about going through a publisher is distribution. So if you're going to get in a bookstore, then you're responsible for distribution. You're having to pay to print books to send all this stuff out if you're doing it on your own. But I know some people there's one person in particular I know that does a lot of self-publishing, and I need to talk to them. I need to have them on my podcast. I want to find out how that's working out for them because, the first year or so, the checks were pretty good, but then it just kind of over time, the book kind of slows down. And the biggest thing about writing a book, it's really more for the personal branding and just kind of one of these things to help show that you're an expert, that it's not really so much money. And I realized that going in because honestly, the first check I got, I didn't expect to make that much. I knew it was just a branding thing. And so it's one of the best things I've done. And they get all the books to Amazon. They end up getting a person to read the book for Audible. And like some of the different conferences and stuff, they get in the conference bookstores. So really working with a publisher is great. So Wylie is my publisher, and like the RSA bookstore, they'll put my books in there, and like at Black Hat, in the Black Hat bookstore and all that. So it's really good to work with a publisher. Otherwise, there's a lot more work for you and you're having to invest money. And for me, there was no, only thing I was putting into it is time and effort.
Wow. That's terrific. That's amazing. Do you know of other people that have like reached out to publishers and they're like, yes, let's write a book, or do you have any advice around this, or was it mostly like they came to you and then everything was smooth?
Yeah. So they came to me when I wrote the book, but people do reach out to book publishers to get published. And I think I'm up to 5 people that I've recommended to Wylie Publishing that's been published. So most of the people I've recommended have gotten published. I think one or two, they didn't accept the book idea, like the book idea.
Are you planning on writing any other books coming out?
Yeah, there's one I really want to write for Wylie. I've got kind of the outline. I just need to get it sent to them. It's a big time commitment. It takes a lot of time. And during the pandemic, it was helpful because we're on lockdown. So what are you going to do? So I had a lot of time to study and a lot of time to write. So I got another idea. I mean, like I said, it's more about brand and less about the money, but yeah, I do have an idea for another one, really just not revealing that idea because I really don't want to give out the idea. But that also had No Starch Press. Yeah, so it's just a matter of finding time to do all that. So I'd really like to write for them because I really like No Starch Press. Wylie Publishing is good as well, but No Starch does a lot of stuff around cybersecurity and technology. And they're also at all the conferences, the CEO and founder of No Starch Press, Bill, is actually at the conferences and stuff. So I really respect that he cares enough that he's there. And
yeah, definitely. All of the like books that are written for No Starch Press in like cybersecurity, I think all of them are hits. Like all of them is really good. I really like the formatting for all the books. I think the majority of the books that I've read in cybersecurity have been No Starch Press, and It's always a pleasure to see them at conferences. I always try to get a sticker, and I think their branding for their shirts was like heavy metal something. It was like kind of cool.
That's cool.
Right. Okay. Alrighty. So we've talked about your books. We talked about the podcasting. We talked about your intro into cybersecurity. So would love to hear kind of like what you've been up to as of more recently within the past like 2 or 3 years, and like how your journey has started since you've been in the industry and how things have shifted over, because it looks like, looking at your LinkedIn and stuff like that, there's a lot here. You've done so much, and want to hear more about, you shifting over and making these changes and like leveling up your skill set as you've been growing in your career.
So one of the things I've really embraced is the public speaking, writing the book and podcasting have done really big things for my career, because actually in 2022, I got my first job working for a vendor, working for a startup. And that's really kind of the space for me, because I do a lot of public speaking. And one of the things I did for that organization was within the first 90 days, they saw more LinkedIn followers, more Twitter followers, more brand awareness. My connections on social media were just organically sharing their content. So I really found kind of where I needed to be in cybersecurity. So really mostly what I'm doing now is just sharing my knowledge of pen testing and offensive security and doing it for that company. So the company I work for now is Horizon3.ai. They're an autonomous pen testing product. And so they automate pen testing. So I'm able to share a lot of use cases, how the product helps, and then just educating people on offensive security. And then like one of my talks where I address the gaps. So kind of be able to take and leverage the public speaking and podcasting, because actually where I'm at now at Horizon 3, I got laid off at the end of February, and the CEO, which is one of the co-founders of the company, had known of me for a while through social media, saw all the public speaking I was doing and all the community stuff, and they ended up recruiting me over. So it's been probably one of the better fits. I mean, I'm not doing pen testing, really not doing technical stuff, but it's a good way for me to help a company. And when I work somewhere, I want to work somewhere I can actually help the company grow and be profitable and not just be drawing a check. And so that's the best way for me to be able to help companies. So since 2022, most of the companies I've worked for as vendors. For a short time, I went back to work, was working for a consulting company, but got laid off back in February. So got to do some more pen testing for a while, but this is really kind of a good area for me because I get to leverage my public speaking and community activities.
So what are some of the responsibilities and things that you get to do that, in this type of role? Because it sounds very exciting if you just get to, have a conversation, speak, and like grow the company and show people like why Horizon 3 is such a great product and service.
So yeah, I'm building out content, public speaking, because before I joined, it was mainly the two co-founders that were speaking. Some of the sales engineers would periodically speak, but they really didn't have anyone outside the two founders doing much speaking. And so for me, I'm usually speaking at close to 20 conferences a year, and where that brings
20 conferences a year.
Yeah. And so this brings companies value because, for instance, a lot of cases, companies like this will go out and pay to do keynotes, or part of the sponsorship comes with a speaking component, but it costs money to speak. But whereas the type I'm doing is organic, I'm either getting invited to speak or I'm submitting a talk and getting accepted. And so basically it just costs the company the price of travel to get there, opposed to paying the fee to sponsor plus, whatever extra for the speaking slot. So this is all coming about. I do some of the stuff that they do that are paid speaking opportunities where they're paying the sponsorship for a conference and speak there. But a lot of it, most of what I get is from being invited or either submitting a CFP. And so one of the coolest places I recently spoke at was back in October. I got to speak in Dubai. I got invited to a fraud and an audit conference there. So
how was that? How was the experience? Just being in Dubai, but also, being there for work and everything else.
It was a lot of fun. It was good. That's one of the nice things about what I do now. So the conference actually paid for my travel. So that was nice to get to travel to Dubai, and it was a really good experience. So that's one of the nice things. I really like to meet people, and I really like to connect. One of my favorite things is to meet people in person that I know from LinkedIn or Twitter. And I get to meet a lot of people that know me from my book and podcast. That's what interesting thing I'll say about the podcast. I've gotten equal benefit or a similar benefit from both of those. So I run into people that know me from my book or people that know me from my podcast. I was at a conference a while back in New York City and was talking with this woman, and she looked down at my badge with my name on it. And she says, "Oh, wow, you're the guy that wrote the book." So it's just interesting to get to meet people that know you through your work and be able to connect on that way.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. Do you have any like, stories that you like really remember in terms of like people coming up to you and you feel like you're a superstar almost?
Some of the coolest stories I have to share. One was that I spoke at Hack Space Con last year. I spoke there this year too, but last year I was there and this guy that listened to my podcast showed up because he saw I was teaching a workshop. So he was there with him and his wife, since this is, in Florida near Kennedy Space Center. And so we were talking, we really hit it off, really nice people. He was going to college for cybersecurity engineering, and he was a construction engineer. So he's looking to make a change into cybersecurity. And when he stepped away, his wife said, "Thanks for doing your podcast, because there's times I can't encourage him and your podcast does." So that was really nice to see. Oh my God,
that's such a sweet thing to say and feel and experience. Oh my goodness.
So that was awesome. And another story I like to share is just kind of some of the benefit of doing the podcasting was last year at DEF CON. It was down towards, I usually leave out Sunday mornings. I don't stay Sunday because it kind of slows down. So one of my friends, Jason Haddix, we were going over back to the hotel from the conference center, and we're walking over and we're going to have dinner together. One of his friends, Ryan, was along with him, and we're going to have dinner. So we're going up to our rooms to drop off our bags and stuff. So I went up to try to drop off my bag, and my door wouldn't unlock. So I go use the phone that's on that floor I'm on and say, "Hey, I can't get in my room." They said, "Is the light blinking yellow?" I said, "Well, your battery needs to be replaced. We'll send someone up." I had to call them like 3 or 4 times before someone came up. It took an hour, and I finally went downstairs. And on that 4th time, they were saying, "Yeah, they're up there changing the battery now." But it was like over an hour. So I missed dinner with Jason. And it was like my last evening there. And I was really disappointed. I went to a pizza place in the hotel, and I'm sitting there eating dinner. And all of a sudden I hear someone yell, "Phillip Wylie." And so I look up and look around, and this guy standing at this table waves and said, "You Phillip Wylie?" "Yes." And he comes over and starts talking to me, and he's a listener to my podcast. So he's been following me for years. And we sat down and talked for like 2 hours, and it was just an awesome experience. A super nice guy. Actually had him on my podcast as a guest, but just some of the things I've done, him listen to the podcast helped him, and just to connect with him, what had turned into what I thought was going to be a bad evening, a bad experience, turned into a really good experience.
That's beautiful. That's terrific. I'm so glad that, it's great to hear when people are building something and sharing something, and it's making an impact in the community, and then you can feel like, the actual like inspiration that you give off, because it's I'll listen similar types of things that I'll listen to get inspired, right? Sometimes I feel pretty lazy, like, oh man, do I got to go to the gym? I don't know if I want to go to the gym. And then I listen to David Goggins talking about how he's like drowning himself at like at SEALs training, and I'm like, well, what am I complaining for? Like, I have no right to be upset about anything. All this guy's like nearly dying, trying to in buds,
The nice thing I'd say about whenever you put your focus on helping others, even if you don't make money, you're still happy, you're still reaping benefits. If you can make money, that's just not icing on the cake. But one of the things I say too is, whether you believe in karma or not, I kind of believe in it myself. So I feel like, if you're helping people, and that was never the intent to get anything out of it, but I've gotten a lot from it. I mean, it's the stuff I do has helped me get jobs easier. I've got to meet a lot of cool people. So there's been awesome benefits from it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think, it helps in multiple areas and stuff like that. And it's not just like, I don't know, how people just feel like, oh, like if I help somebody, I could be working on myself or doing something else. It's like, you can do both at the same time. You just gotta kind of have to figure out what that looks like to you, Okay. All right, great. So, just probably a few more questions, and then we can kind of wrap this up, I think, because we're hitting like a 2-hour mark. So, what are some things that you have going on outside of, your current work and stuff like that you're like looking to start up or do, or things that you wish to do?
Yeah, kind of some of the new things. I just recently formed a LLC for the stuff I do outside of work, the podcasting and that type of stuff. So have enough of that coming along. I need to, them getting sponsorships and stuff to be able to write things off and take advantage of some of the expenses. I've just been basically just eating. And then I do a collaboration with a team of two other podcasts, Cyber Distortion podcast and Barcodes podcast. We do this collaboration called Cyber Circus Network. And so we do live podcasts at events. So like last week, I spoke at B-Sides Philly, but we also did a live podcast at B-Sides Philly as one of the sessions there. We did one also at Boardwalk Bites earlier in the year, a new conference in Atlantic City. And then we got one, the very first one we did was in Grapevine, Texas last year. And we called it the Lone Star Cyber Circus. And we got the second one coming up tomorrow night in Grapevine, Texas. So it's a really fun collaboration, a fun group of people to collaborate with. So we've got a couple panels one on breaking into security and one on AI. So it should be a lot of fun.
Okay. And so like these live types of events, is it kind of like a live podcast where like you have the audience members listening to as you guys are speaking, or do you take questions? If it's a panel, you guys probably take questions, but like, what does this look like if I walk in and I see you guys like there?
Yeah, it's a live podcast. We do sometimes take questions from the audience if we have time, but yeah, and I did one solo. I did one live episode at B-Sides Twin Cities back earlier this year. I was speaking at B-Sides Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And one of the things I did there too is for speaking there, they couldn't cover my travel. So I worked a deal where they gave me, listed me as a sponsor for me to do a live podcast episode. So I did a live podcast episode there. So the live stuff is kind of fun. And and one of the things I like about meeting other podcasters, I met up with KO, the founder of a MDR startup, and he's got a podcast called KO's Corner. And he was in my area back a couple weeks ago and one Friday. So we met up in this outside of this old town square of where I live in Carrollton, Texas. And we recorded a live episode. So it's kind of got me motivated to do more in-person stuff, because most of the stuff I do, like you, is recorded remotely, but the stuff in person is kind of fun. So it's got me motivated to start packing up some recording gear. And when I'm at conferences and stuff, take more advantage of that, because the in-person stuff is a lot of fun and the live stuff is fun as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's my next move. So once we move back stateside, it's not just, I want to have like an actual studio where people can come in, but I think traveling is and then going to the conferences and just setting up like, let's have a conversation is going to be the next move. So, do you have any advice for anybody that's starting that you wish, other things that you wish you knew before you started doing live, podcasting or live events?
Yeah. As far as the live events, just kind of wished I would have started doing them sooner, but there's a lot of fun. Don't overthink it, because some people get too worried about production quality of a live event. So just getting the basic video, I think the content's more important than production value when it comes to live events. Because whenever I did the live podcast at B-Sides Twin Cities, I brought in someone that was like a videographer that had their own recording equipment and all that. So it was nice that they brought the cameras, but one of the only downsides to the recording, it was like a 2-camera shot, but the light was coming in at an angle and really couldn't use a lot of the video, but it still turned out well. And the episode was well received. So I think sometimes don't overthink the production value of it, the quality, as long as it can be heard and is clear, that's good enough, because, the video is just kind of secondary.
I really want to get more into having those types of live conversations and stuff. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything that you'd like to promote or share on the podcast?
Yeah. One of the things I just like to share for anyone in cybersecurity, trying to break into cybersecurity, one of the biggest things you can do is networking. Networking has really helped me to do a lot in my career, has helped me find jobs quickly. One time I had was looking for another job. One of the jobs I was at wasn't working out. When I gave my 2 weeks notice, I announced on Twitter and LinkedIn that I was looking for a new job. And the day after my last day, I had 2 job offers.
Wow. That's amazing.
This was like October of last year. So the power of your network is huge. Nowadays, some of these application systems are using AI, you may not have the right keywords. You may get looked over. But if you connect with people that work in the organization or the hiring manager, you'll have a lot better shot at getting the job. And one of the experiences I like to share was back several years ago. I went to work for US Bank. I'd met someone that at a local OWASP meeting, and they were a pen tester and said, "Hey, we've got an opening on our team if anyone's interested." So we connected. I gave him my resume. Within 2 weeks, I went through interviews, had a job offer. At the same time, I applied for a role at Bank of America, and I did the traditional route of applying online. And I didn't hear back from them until a year later. And, at this time, I was an experienced pen tester with good certifications and all this, and I got overlooked. So if you're new or just starting out, it can be more difficult. So if you can get out and meet people in person, connect with people on LinkedIn, if you're able to get your resume in the hands of someone who works there, it's going to be a lot easier to get a job than just hoping that signing up on the job boards and applying for jobs are going to help.
Yeah, I was a recruiter in cybersecurity, so like everything you're saying is 100% right. If you're applying, your resume is going to be stacked on a bunch of other people. If you don't know the hiring manager, you better do your best to just message them or try to figure out who they are and be like, "Hey, I sent my application in. Just want to, shake your hand virtually, whatever. Say this is my skill set." They might read it, they might not, but you're going to have a much better chance than if you're just submitting. You get a lot of companies, they'll like actively not. There's a weird tactic. So companies will like actively like not reply even though they don't think that you're a qualified candidate. They'll just wait until like months later and then send something once they actually have somebody, because they just don't want to maybe hurt your feelings or whatever the case is. Another just terrible practice that I've seen as well is that some companies will list the job, but the job doesn't exist. They just want to give the perception that the company's doing well, so that things are going and they're doing well. But regardless of that, you should be applying. And you should try to contact your hiring manager, post on LinkedIn that you're looking for work. And then, yeah, like it is the power of your network that does mean a lot, especially for cybersecurity and working. Because of that exact reason, yeah, your resume can be placed in a bunch of other ones. And, internal hiring teams generally have so much like difficulties in like trying to find talent and stuff like this. So don't be discouraged if like a company doesn't like hire you. It's really not personal. I think it's more like negligence on internal hiring teams because they're not really highly incentivized to find the best candidates because they're already getting paid. There's no commission. So like external recruiting agencies like ours, we're like commission based for the most part. So we are paid to find the best. And if they're not great, then we don't get paid. So like, it's just a different system. So you guys got to just be avid about it. So, and always keep learning, list on the things that you're taking, try hack the box. If you're doing that, great. Even better, create a Medium account or some type of blogging things, talk about what you're learning and stuff like that and add that in there because that also counts. All right. I think that's enough of me ranting about what things we should have. Last section, this will be a little bit quicker. What books do you recommend for people, whether it be cybersecurity or even outside of cybersecurity, just personal growth and development and mind shifting to being a better individual and human?
Yeah, so as far as just stuff outside of cybersecurity, Atomic Habits is a good book for kind of building some of those habits. As you kind of mentioned earlier, like the 4-hour work week, those are kind of good ways to get ideas to be more effective. You may not be able to do a 4-hour work week, but you're able to improve, your productivity. So I think something like that's good. A lot of great books on cybersecurity. So I would focus if you're looking at ways to improve in your cybersecurity career, look at some of the newer technologies, try to learn generative AI to help you in your security role and keep up with some of the latest technologies. Because one of the biggest things I see and sometimes have been left behind at times and have to play catch up is not embracing some of the newer technologies. So just kind of keeping up to date on that stuff, be aware of what's going on. And also too, I think another thing that's great too is keep up with the security news. So any kind of breaches, any kind of vulnerabilities are out there, keep up with that because this is going to make you better at your job, but also this is good information to be able to discuss when you're on an interview. Sometimes senior management will ask you what do you think of Log4Shell or Log4j? What do you think of Stuxnet? To be able to speak on those is important. So.
Yeah, especially if you're like, how would you defend against Technex? If like you don't know what Technex is, you're going to be in trouble. Especially if you're applying for like a role that is blue team defending and stuff like that, where you, and if you're having difficulties thinking like, I didn't know about Technex, how will I know about it? I recommend just going ChatGPT, being like, I want to be a SOC analyst. I want to be this role. Imagine I have an interview coming up. What are some recent events that have happened where somebody in my position could have made an impact in the company that I'm working at? So that way you'll get a better spark of ideas about different types of things to like learn and understand. So when you apply, they'll be like, oh, this person, if we had him, it would have prevented, the MGM fiasco or something like this, right? So, okay. One more question, just outside of like the book side, but you're also on the review board for Black Hat. How did that happen? Is there a story there?
Yeah, for Black Hat Middle East and Africa, I got invited to speak there last year. So some of the other things they invited me is to be on the review board there, and I actually ran their podcast last year. I don't think they ran it this season, but last year they had me host their podcast. So that's one of the things too, is sometimes when you speak at these conferences, other opportunities come along. When you get involved, like for instance, there's a conference that I speak at that I submitted a CFP for, and I get invited back each year to speak there. So it's just taking advantage of these opportunities when you get them.
Yeah. Apply for CFPs as well. If you guys think like, oh, I don't know enough, it's like, you can also talk about like what you are learning and just kind of go deeper into it. You don't have to say you're an expert, and if you feel so uncomfortable just in the beginning of your first slide, just say, I'm not an expert, but this is what my talk will be about. And then, that's the first way to get into starting to speak and stuff like this as well. So that's my ideas. Well, all right, great. Thank you so much for your time, Phillip. It's been great having you on as a guest. I think we talked a lot about a lot of things, and I'm very happy to hear so much of your life and your story, going from how you were doing pro wrestling, wrestling the bear that needed, a little bit of smoke break, all the way up to the cybersecurity aspects of everything that you've been doing and your recent achievements with your book, as well as with the podcasting, your podcast, as well as you just mentioned being on the review board for Black Hat as well, and working with Horizon 3. So thank you so much again for being on the podcast, and we'd love to hear from you again.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, and have a great day.